Ladies and gents, welcome. Thank you very much. It's always nice to see we have such great attendance at St. Gallen and these fantastic sessions we have with some interesting topics. A quick introduction to the panelists. You have their bios in your agenda, so I'm not going to read out long bios, but I just want to welcome very warmly. We have Douglas Flint, who's the Group Chairman of HSBC Holdings. Don't believe what it says. Well, you can believe if you want that it says he was born in 1995 in the bio.
I wish. I wish.
I know. In spirit, at least.
I wish.
And Dr. Peter Fankhauser is the Group Chief Executive Officer of Thomas Cook Group, which he's now based in London. And they both come in to join us for this session. And the basic premise, as you know, is proudly small in big corporations. We've got two of the biggest corporations in the world here in terms of Thomas Cook and of HSBC. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation on how small and big relate to these kind of companies. My tendency with my moderating is to really open it up to you. I tend to think of you as participants, not audience, so hopefully you will be participating before long. But what I'd like to do is just kick off with a couple of general questions, if I could, to both of the guests, and really just get the conversation rolling. Perhaps I could start with Douglas Flint first, and ask, when you have a company that's so big, so global, how do you make something so big feel small enough so that people feel that they're still relevant?
I think one of the most important things is the underpin to it is try to create a corporate culture, a corporate character, so that people kind of know the environment that they're part of, because you can have all the policies and procedures and directions in the world, but unless people have a feeling for the kind of organization that you want them to be, and I think you're kind of lost. Then you split people down into much more manageable units, and you know, we have a philosophy of 8 by 8. No one has more than 8 reports, and there's no more than 8 levels between the guy at the top and the guy at the bottom. But the other thing is having a very intensive and continuous program of feedback, so that the people at the top of the organization are getting genuine messages back, but because they're holding small groups of 20, 30 people at a time, informal, no records taken, feedback sessions of what's going on, what's troubling you, what could we do better to make your life better, and what do you think of the organization you're part of. So these are the things that I think are most important.
Peter Fankhauser, I'll get your perspective on this.
That was very wise what Doug said. So it's about making them feel important and empower them to make decisions as well, and empower them to make the decision where the customer is. So at the forefront of the business, that you give them a joy to serve the customer, and really to also to let them fail in some decisions. So I think that the culture of forgive failures, not always the same failures, of course, but forgive failures, and encourage them to really take decision and not delegate the decision upwards. That is something which we try hard in Thomas Cook.
And that's a really interesting expression, let people fail. That is to say, let them not be nervous about making mistakes, that there would be any untoward consequence. But it's quite important, obviously, when you have say, for example, a bank, it's how much you let people fail or how much you let them feel they can make a mistake is obviously going to have a certain threshold, isn't it, Douglas?
You can, and I think that one of the things that we try and train into people is the concept of sharing issues. We all make mistakes, and making a mistake is not a problem. Making a mistake that you haven't shared the problem with somebody else to sort of say, here's a difficult issue, how do I deal with it? Or here's something I'm unsure about, I want to escalate it. That's what we encourage people to do. You know, people will make mistakes, and that's okay, and that potentially leads to development training and so on and so forth. But to us, the big sin is not sharing a problem. It's trying to deal with it all by yourself, because you're saying, we've got 266,000 people in the organization. It's very unlikely there isn't somebody who's seen this problem before. So share it, and a problem shared is a much easier thing to deal with. That's the culture we try to create.
I'd like to get a perspective, perhaps from Peter, on how, when trying to steer such a big ship, so to speak, you're able to stay in touch with every aspect of the company. And that's a big challenge when you're a leader, to be small enough to be accessible, but big enough to be able to make the kind of decisions a company at your level needs.
Yeah, you have to behave that you are accessed. So you have to behave that people there to come to you and to share things, and to share as well things which are not going wrong. That is one thing which is very important. And then I think it doesn't make such a big difference whether you lead 100 people or whether you lead 22,000 people. I don't lead 22,000 people because I lead my team. And choose your people right in your teams, and that is so important that you implement this culture, that every leader chooses his people right, and the right people with the right values. You can trust, and that is somehow, that makes a company manageable from a cultural point of view. Of course, you have to have the systems, to have the IT, you have to have the control systems and the information which has to come up to you, and in the right size and in the right details, not too detailed. But what is most important in a big organization is that you give those guys the feeling that they are not just in a big tanker and it's just going and you need 5 kilometers to turn.
I'm going to ask a quick question to both of you before I open it up now, and that is, can a company become too big? Douglas, what do you think?
Yes, it can. I mean, one of the challenges we constantly get in our industry today is, are you too big to manage? And I think that's a very good question. And our answer to it is that if you're complex, you probably have to be small. If you're simple, you can be large, because you can embed the same processes and the same culture throughout an organization that does the same thing in multiple countries, in multiple business lines, but it's a relatively simple model. But yes, you can do, and I think organizations need to guard against getting to the point that what has made them successful is lost because they become so diverse that they don't have a handle on things, and then they find the problems come from some small piece that they're not focusing on because it's never been a problem, but it's over there, it's tiny, it kind of makes a little bit of money, I didn't give it any attention, and then it suddenly comes and zaps you.
In your opinion, Peter, if it is possible to become too big, what would beat that threshold?
I don't think that is a threshold somewhere. I think the definition that the company is too big is if a company loses sight of their values.
So irrespective of actual size?
Irrespective of the size. And that can be with 1,000 people or can be with 60,000 people. And this is you can't control everything. So you have to have a big portion of confidence. And that comes back to what I say. You have to choose the right people.
Well, let's do this. Let's open it up and see if we can get questions from our participants. I don't know if we need a little more light, perhaps. I don't know if we're able to get you microphones, or you'll have to speak up a little bit. But if you have a question, please, and tell us who you are and where you're from. It always helps to know. So we've got a young lady in the middle there, and we'll get your microphone. It's coming towards you.
I think I'll stand.
Oh, there you go.
To meet all people in front of me. I'm Priyanka from India, and at the beginning of this symposium, we had a pre-program workshop where we were asked to debate about can big innovate. Now, I would like to hear from both of you, can big innovate? And if yes, some examples would help.
All right, can big innovate? Perhaps, Peter, you could start with that.
Yes, big can innovate. Maybe sometimes not as fast as you would like. And there you have to remove barriers. And give you an example. When I see something somewhere which I think that has the potential to become really big, a big innovation, but I'm not always right, because I can also somehow judge things the wrong way around. But if I really find something that could be really a breakthrough idea, then I take the one who had the idea, I take him out. I ask him, do you want to manage? Do you want to lead the team to make it happen? And this we tried now twice or 3 times, and we are getting there. But with all these barriers, then they come back to me, and they have direct access to me and saying, hey, now I have to align that with the product managers, and I have to align that with this and that controller. And then my job, and I really deal with that as well personally, my job is then to really remove the barriers and to send out as well the signal, hey, the boss at the top is caring that we are getting speed. And most of the time, when you have great ideas, you don't implement them fast enough.
Douglas Flint, your thought on that?
No, definitely you can. I mean, one of the great things about being big is you can afford to set up small groups of kind of people that have been de-linked from the big institutional frameworks and sort of given away and put into project teams and said, go away and think about this and come back with some ideas, usually young people, usually not very many of them, and usually freed of any kind of constraint, given a budget and say, you know, you think there's an opportunity here, go away and think about it, and then come back, and then the big infrastructure of the organization can see whether it will work in application terms. So we do, largely in technology, digital, particularly in digital at the moment.
Let me see if there's any more hands going up, and again, put them up nice and clearly if you have a question so we can get the microphone to you, and I'll try and keep an eye out for them. One thing I wonder with a large corporation, there's a big ladder people can climb. And I wonder at what point you have to pick the kind of people who know where they fit into the system. I mean, when recruiting for such a big company, the danger is everyone has, or could be, that everyone has huge ambitions to climb the ladder. How do you find the right kind of talented people who say, this is the job I want to do, not a career path I want to follow necessarily? It's an interesting challenge. I see it in broadcasting, for example, because everyone has a particular ambition. I wonder how you see that, Peter.
First of all, I tried to make the ladder a bit smaller. So we took about two layers we took out, and with the objective to be closer to the customer from the top. So that was one thing. I think that the best you can do is that you give everybody really a meaning, a content where he can work on it, and then to have intensive talks with everybody on every level, what could be a possible career. And my experience is, at least at the level below me and the one below, we miss talents. We don't have enough. And we have, that is one of the problems I was not facing now in Thomas Cook, that I had too many good leaders.
That is an interesting challenge. Douglas, a thought also. In one of Malcolm Gladwell's books, and I can't remember which one it is, but he talks about a particular company that found that their best model was to reach a certain threshold. I think it was about 150 staff, and then they had to split and create units because they could manage better when they were in units of about 150. And I wonder if that kind of model can work when you have a company as big as yours, for example.
No, I do. I mean, I said we have an 8x8, so no one can have more than 8 reports. But I mean, you know, I think the British Army worked in units of 20, and I think once you get beyond about 20 people in a unit, you begin to need to have seconds in command and so on and so forth. So, yes, we like to break people down into really quite small units. Most of the teams are under 20 people, even though there's $265,000. Mm-hmm. And it needs to be like that because there's a control aspect as well. And you can't have line of sight over hundreds of people unless you've got a hierarchical structure.
I'm going to get a microphone to the front here to the lady at the front, please. We've got one, thank you. Just if you put your hand in. That's it.
Hi, Atya from Pakistan. Question from Mr. Flint. So HSBC was recently in a tax evasion scandal, its Swiss branch. And you mentioned a tolerance for individual failure, but I was wondering, how do you deal with an institutional failure like that, and how do you restore individual confidence in your employees after that, those who were not part of this?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. One of the most challenging things in management is to discover you didn't know things that you think you should have done, or you wonder whether you could have done. The circumstances you describe are actually 10, 12 years ago. And as a consequence of that, we slimmed the particular operation in Switzerland down by 2/3. It had 30,000 accounts. It's now got 10,000 accounts. We went from a classic Swiss banking model to one where it was fully tax transparent and had to be proved that the individuals were tax transparent if they were non-resident to their local tax authorities, and that there was evidence of that from independent lawyers and accountants and so on. And so we de-risked the business. And we looked very carefully at the individuals that had been proximate, although given this was all 10, 12 years ago, there were very few of them left. And we put in a huge amount of training to ensure that people understood that although that was already in our training, that things that had happened should not have happened, the fact that they had meant there was something wrong with the assurance process. So I think things will always happen. As I said, it's very humbling to discover that there are things that are going on that you don't know about, which is always going to be a challenge. And you learn from that by de-risking. You learn by that by putting in place more people-to-people oversight controls. But you have to, and then fundamentally, going back to what I said at the beginning, the most important thing you can do is reinforce and reinforce and reinforce the character of the organization that you want to have, so that people in the organization just know there are things without being told or looking at a reference manual. That's not the sort of thing that we do. And you reinforce in other people that if they see things that they think that's not consistent with the values that we understand, that they speak up and talk to a supervisor or escalate through all the kind of whistleblower disclosure lines that we have, so that the organization is aware. And we celebrate people that point to problems that could cause us reputational damage. What we can't do is take a time machine and go back 15 years.
I want to get a question to Peter Fankhauser, and one actually I'd like your perspective on too as well, please, Douglas, but since you basically became an executive, in the time you've been at the top of an important and large system, the way people communicate has changed. Emails. When I first started out as a journalist, we used typewriters. I mean, I don't think most young people have even seen one now. So the tools have changed. And I wonder how these latest communication tools have either made life easier or perhaps even complicated life in some ways.
Yeah, my wife complains a bit about the new communication tools. So it doesn't let you go. And I have my office in the meantime on an iPad, and I travel with the iPad, and I have everything there, and we try extremely hard in Thomas Cook that we answer our mails within the same day. Also, compared to when I was still in Kwoni, it is so much faster. But it is so much more interesting, because if I open the iPad, then I have the whole range of challenges on the iPad, and then you work through it, and yeah, it became much faster, much more pace.
But potentially, there's in the speed of things, with the speed of things being so fast, there's also the potential to make more mistakes. Because sometimes you're having to respond quickly without necessarily thinking things through or getting.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that you always go back with a solution. That doesn't mean, but just I got it. Let me think it over and put it on a time scale. That's what it is. Otherwise, I had also some colleagues which I realized they were not even reading the attachment, because there was no attachment on it on the mail, and they were commenting on the attachment. So. You know, that there you have to be careful. So, despite the speed, you have to be reasonable, and people don't expect that you take every decision within seconds, because otherwise, as you say, then you make the wrong ones.
And it also gives you a chance to be in touch with such a large base of staff in a very effective way, presumably too.
Yeah, you become much more transparent, but you have as well the advantage not only that they reach you, that you reach all of them within seconds. That is also something which is a great advantage. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that you should not somehow be personal in your different regions. We are traveling a lot. My CFO, myself, we are a lot on the road, and just go into the business and make ourselves really. The picture how it is.
Yeah, the face-to-face is still
the face-to-face is definitely still very valuable. And what is somehow the danger of mails, you can really bash on somebody by mail. You would never bash like that, and you have it face-to-face.
Right.
And you can hide behind the machine, and that is a total disadvantage in our world.
That's an interesting perspective. I'm going to get Douglas Flint as well.
I think the next generation is going to think very thoughtfully about digitalization and technology. one of the things we try and train people and succeed only partially is remembering that every single email, every single BlackBerry message, everything they do that is recorded is there forever. And people often communicate in a chatty way online as they would if they were chatting like this, and say things that don't look terribly clever if they're taken out of context, or even if they're in context, as there's a record of kind of strange conversations. And I think that, you know, people are going to. So then you get into the situation of, so should we be monitoring what people are doing within our organization? And our regulators are encouraging us to think that maybe we should be monitoring so that you can pick up patterns of behavior that might be consistent with behavior that you don't like. And then you say, well, if you start monitoring people in what they do in the workspace, should you also be monitoring on what they do outside the workspace? Because they may be using social media in a way that you wouldn't like and still associating themselves with your organization and your brand. And you're into you know, a really fascinating debate that I think is only in the very early stages of privacy and companies' responsibilities in terms of protecting themselves, but does that mean intrusion into what people are doing within the workspace? Almost certainly, but what about out the workspace? And when all these tools are available and they can be a rich source of data, do you have a responsibility to go there or not? I don't know. But what I do know is that the enormity of data and the sophistication of the tools that's now available to analyze that data, you know, every organization now has a treasure trove of really, really good customer information and possibly, you know, bits and pieces of problematic employee information. And how to deal with that in a control perspective, I think, is a big moral challenge.
No selfie ban yet at HSBC for the start.
No selfie ban?
No selfie ban. HSBC me now.
It's a very good idea.
I'm just checking for any more hands. We've got a couple more that have gone up. I'll get to them in the order they went up. At the back there first, then I'll come to you. And to you as well. Yeah. 3.
Hello, my name's Ryan. I'm originally from Canada. My question is in regards how large corporations handle failures. So typically in a large corporation, if you make a mistake, particularly one of those mistakes that winds up costing a lot of money or has a lot of bad publicity associated with it, the response is a lot of meetings, a lot of lawyers involved, and eventually a very large policy document dictating how you're going to ensure this never happens again. And while learning from the past mistakes is certainly very important, once these policies and restrictions reach a certain critical mass, it comes to the point where the capacity of an organization to think to the future and to really innovate in any substantial way becomes dramatically restricted. So my question is, how do you reconcile the need to learn from past mistakes while maintaining the ability to look to the future and innovate?
And Peter, I'll go with you on first on that.
Mm-hmm. It depends on the mistake. If it's really a failure and you have a mistake which was really against the values of your companies, then you react harsher and then you don't want them to really learn. So it is really somehow, or then learning, but maybe outside of your company. So that is really something. If it's an issue where you made mistakes or you failed somewhere, then the best thing is that you say, okay, what did you learn out of it, and then give him something else. And you know that was somehow in my career. I have one example which was absolutely striking for me and for the development of myself. When I most probably had your age, I was sent to Germany from Kuoni at that time, and had to build up Kuoni, a tour operator in Germany. Big market, and we had a partner. When the partner stepped out, we were just about to start, and I did mistakes, and when we were burning 5 million, at that time for Kuoni was a lot of money, still a lot of money. And I went back in the boardroom and said, look, I need now another 10 to really have a chance to get this business running. If it were my money, I would not give it to me. And they were sending me back to Frankfurt, and I closed it. I had to close. And that was such a tough experience. And then I went back to Zurich, and then at that time the chief executive said, Peter, now I invested 5 million in you, I want to have it back. And he promoted to the C-level. And he promoted me to look after all the markets outside of Switzerland. Every market was losing money, and I paid it back, but several times.
Douglas Flint, what was the biggest mistake you were forgiven?
Biggest mistake?
That you were forgiven as
That I was forgiven.
We'll say professionally, not personally.
My wife's never forgiven me. I'm going to think about that. That's not because I haven't made mistakes. I just don't remember being forgiven. I think I'll try and think of something. I remember one of the things that was. I've had 2 careers. I was 18 years in KPMG, accounting firm, and 20 years now in HSBC. And I remember behaving appallingly when I was doing an assignment for a manager I didn't have any respect for. And I got very childish, actually. He wasn't very efficient, so I went overboard and just inundated him with work product that he couldn't review in time. And it was, and I remember the guy above him taking me aside and saying, don't be an idiot. You're behaving like a child, and I know there's a problem, but your job is to work for him and just do it. And that was a good lesson. I think that the question is a really good one, because I think there's 2 aspects of failure. One is the control aspect of learning lessons, which clearly you have to do. The other thing, and it comes back to reputational issues, and one's been highlighted, is an organization feels very, very deeply about itself, and the people within the organization feel very deeply about itself. So when something goes wrong, the biggest challenge you have is not the fixing what went wrong, it's fixing people's perception of the organization they work for, because they go home and their wife, their brother, their sister, their daughter, their grandmother says, how come you work for an organ? I've read it in the papers, and the papers aren't always as kind as they might be with the facts. But I read something in the papers, and you work for that organization, and there's a tremendous challenge to how do you communicate in a way that's transparent and fair, and at the same time not get yourself into difficulty of belittling the problem that is a real one, because people feel very, very intensely about a problem that may have happened 10,000 miles away, but it's their brand, their organization. When they face up to customers, people say, like the lady in the front row, aren't you the organization that was in the papers last week doing something? And they have to know how to respond to that and say, that was a long time ago, or we fixed it, or you don't have that problem with me. So, and dealing with that is hugely, hugely problematical, to give people pride in the organization that they work for when something dents their confidence.
There was a gentleman in the middle. If you put your hand up, wait, sir, and I'll come to you. And there was another one behind afterwards. Thank you. I'll try to get them in the order they've gone up. Thank you.
Thank you. Christoph from Germany. I want to follow up on the topic of digital communication. You discussed 2 points, if I remember correctly. One was that you start sharing information which you really don't want to be traced back to. And the other, you might be burned out because you start answering emails at night and in your holidays. Both being problems. I have another problem with it, actually. Oftentimes it appears to me that people start wasting time of other people by communication. You put CC everyone you have in your company, you share any kind of thought you have on a huge distribution list, and thereby waste tons of time of your colleagues. And so to my mind, it's this needs actually a lot of thought. I've thought about how to deal with that, maybe regulation, and that there is only once a day that emails are being put through to your colleagues, but then regulation is a little bit stupid as well in that sense. So my question would be, first, how do you deal with that on a personal level? And second, do you have any kind of measures in taking care of that your colleagues don't waste your and other colleagues' time in your companies? Thank you.
Interesting idea of only limiting the number of emails. I wanted to tell you the building's on fire, but I reached my quota kind of situation. Peter, if you could do the first.
I believe you can do a lot by sending signals from your desk in how you behave and how you deal with those CCs. I hate those CCs, and if I said I answer every mail within a day, then I explicitly almost never answer to a CC because I put the one cursor to löschen, delete. No, honestly, I have so many mails coming in, and about the third, I just delete. And people knows that in the meantime, and because they don't get a reaction on CC, because most of the time they somehow think if I send that as well to Peter, then he may realize that I work as well.
So it's a very distinct policy of it.
Yeah, but we have no rules. But I subline that sometimes and then just make a remark in a meeting, and then they realize, aha, okay.
Douglas, do you have any particular technique in filtering?
No, but I'm beginning to think I need to, because the amount of spam mail that now comes through, which just blocks up the box, and also there is a tendency to be copied on stuff, and I worry about the situation where something goes wrong and you're facing someone who said, well, you were copied on this, the email came to you, you must have read it, and you didn't object, so you must have approved. So I know a number of people in my industry at my level who don't have an email address. Their office has an email address, and they get their assistant to filter it and then have a record of what's passed, and if it's not passed, they haven't seen it. And maybe that, I'm loath to do that because I kind of like to see what's coming in, but I can see a point where it just gets so burdensome that to protect not just yourself but the organization, you have to filter in a way, because the tendency to CC 50 people sometimes is there, and it's not a good tendency.
But it's not a problem of burning out in holidays. So I do, and my family knows that. When we are on holidays, I do 2 hours mails, because then I can come back and I don't have destroyed the whole holiday within the first 3 days when you have just piles of paper. So I prefer to have just actual, and that I'm up to date, and then it is much less burning than if you go back and you just everything is falling on you.
Very scientific term, that.
Yeah.
The gentleman with the microphone at the back there, please. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Yannick from Copenhagen. I run a fintech firm in Denmark. So traditionally, large institutions have had a reputation for thinking they need to build everything in-house, all new services, etc. I think that is changing well with the whole movement towards open innovation. So what are you doing to include the startup ecosystems everywhere, basically where you're present, in your innovation processes, if you are at all, and how do you go about that?
Excellent question, actually. And Douglas, this is a really interesting point in that many big corporations can actually essentially manage their size by outsourcing work or using outside expertise to get things done. What scope do you have to do that?
Oh, huge. I mean, and fintech's a great example. I mean, I would expect that the vast majority of edgy fintech that we'll end up deploying will have been developed somewhere else, because people say there's a whole bunch of application developers out there who want to sort of disintermediate the industry. There are some, definitely, but the vast majority of them, in my judgment, want to create something that we want to sell to 51 million customers. So, they want to work with us. They want to have a cool app that we think is brilliant, and we say, yeah, we'll put that through our system. So I think it's great there are people out there doing these cool things, and we want to work with as many of them as we can. I mean, we're constantly asking people to give us ideas. So because they're the people that are thinking as to, I wonder if there's a use for this application. So I think the industry, that is how we can take the benefit of really small, innovative, cutting-edge companies. We use it all the time. We wouldn't do that kind of stuff in-house. We would do the application of it, but not the invention of it.
And Peter, technology apart, there's also the issue of you can actually outsource, particular required aspects of the work that your company requires. How do you ensure that fits in with your company policies, your sort of goals and mission, and that you're not kind of handing over something important to someone who doesn't really have the same goals?
Yeah, we have we know what is the core and what we are never giving out. And we know what is not core and where we can say, okay, that can be done better outside of our company. So this is and to really choose the right partner, there we have just strict processes in place where we are going through this process, and there I'm pretty confident that in this case the process is really helpful.
Everyone in the company has to know then what those core things are and have to be very much in line with that, presumably.
Definitely, yes, definitely.
Thank you for your patience, and I'll come to you.
Thank you. Jonathan from Bolivia in South America. Sometimes big corporations, especially in the developing countries, are seen as the boogeyman, the big guy that comes and takes over small and medium enterprises, and it's kind of a hazard for entrepreneurship. I know that's not always the case, but sometimes Microsoft has been seen like this, for example. But I just want to know, what are the corporations that you're leading doing to change this view, especially in developing economies? Thank you.
And actually, Douglas comes out. HSBC, of course, has this amazing campaign about being global and how the future is going. It's been incredible in building the brand of it. How do you ensure that brand feels local to people that are worried this is kind of an outside force that might have an adverse impact on their own sort of?
Well, we stopped using the world's local bank about 10 years ago, but it stays with us a bit like never leave home without it. So, and it's kind of true still, in the sense that every single customer interaction is a local one. But what you want to do is bring the power of the network to the desktop of the individual, whether they're in a very small country like Mauritius or Brunei or wherever, and give them the same capability as someone sitting in London or Hong Kong or New York would have, and that's the power of the network. But I think you can distinguish between dominant category killers like Microsoft and many other companies, of which I'd say we're one. We have to be part of the community we serve. So there's no point about us being seen apart from it. So we try and be seen as a community bank everywhere where we operate, but a community bank that's plugged into a much larger global network.
It's interesting, Peter. There's this expression I came across years ago, glocalization, where sort of global ideas can be put into place in a local way so that they can still have value, essentially a global value, but have a local presence that makes people feel it's also something they have some kind of affinity with or for.
Yeah, what we try hard is the backbone of the business we put on platforms. Now, that is nothing new. That is not even innovative. But for the travel industry, it's quite innovative because we are principally one of the first who are successfully doing that now. And then every business is local, and every market is different. You don't have even to go to Bolivia to see that. You can go from Switzerland to Germany, or Germany to England, to UK. That are totally different markets in terms of customer behavior, in terms of web penetration, in terms of buying habits. But if it comes in our product, if it comes to the hotel, you share a hotel with a Bolivian, with a Swiss, with a whatever, and this is a myth in our industry, that the Germans want to go in a German hotel and the Brits want to go in a Brit hotel. We made a research of 18,000 clients in Europe, and we realized 10% want to export their home country into the holiday destination. 90% are totally fine if the balance is right to share it with international colleagues and friends. So that the product on the platform is going to be the same for all our markets, but how you sell and how you approach the customer and how you deal with the customer is totally local.
So if you put your hand up so we can get the microphone to you there. Thank you.
My name is Sandner from Austria. I want to ask you how you have organized in your organizations to develop new products, and how do you manage that qualified products can be admitted to your sales organizations?
Okay. Douglas, perhaps I could put that to you first, sir.
We do a huge amount of focus group testing. So in other words, large numbers of our staff are involved in working with customers saying, you know, what is it that we don't do that you'd like? We examine what competitors are doing. But mostly we work with our customers in terms of saying, what are the things what are the needs that you have that we could serve better? And then we design something and we test it. And then we go through now a very rigorous process of value exchange that sort of says, this is the product, what's the value to the customer, what's the value to us, and is the value proportionate between the customer and us, and what's the return on our investment in the product? And if that's a high return, can we justify that return because of the intellectual property that's gone into it, or the distribution cost, or whatever? So I mean, does the customer want it? Does it meet our criteria in terms of value exchange? And are there no regulatory issues around that product and the way it's packaged and transparency and so on? Actually, banking is a relatively simple business in that regard, because most financial needs are relatively simple. But there's always tweaks. But it's based on customer focus groups.
Your view on this, Peter?
Yeah, we are still in the stage where we can take profit of best practice within the group, because we were, before 2012, let's put it this way, we were a very siloed business. And we were tearing down the walls between those different segments and different regions. And we are really having, in every market, we have somehow really a pocket of excellence. And we take it from there. Of course, we do this customer research as well, but we still have a lot of potential just to make best practice and roll it out very fast into the other markets.
Time to squeeze in one more question. Gentleman there.
Hello, I'm Clement from France. I read a few weeks ago an article which was saying how a big failure would be the try to change the banking system in Europe, because Goldman Sachs has multiplied his lobby budget by 17 and UBS by 14 between last year and that year. My question is not about that, but about the fact that, do you think in the same time we see very small companies like Uber or Airbnb that reach to change the legislations in quite a fast way with seemingly quite an efficiency? Do you think that being very big is, in a certain way, a default for you when you try to lobby and to protect your interests? Or is it just because you are too evil reputed?
Okay, so...
I think there's quite a distinction. I think there are things that Uber is a classic example of something that didn't exist a couple of years ago, and has transformed a market that was a large market but was very fragmented, and they have found a way to offer a competing service by simply being an intermediary at lower cost and at an equivalent or higher service criteria. And clearly it's been very, very popular. I think that size can be a burden in terms of being nimble. But size also reflects historic success. We're 150 years old this year. And size, to some extent, reflects a history of success and a history of trust that 51 million customers have in us. So if you start off with that embedded benefit of your history, having got to that size, you really have the opportunity of retaining that, because you must be doing something right to be here 150 years later and have a customer base of that size. So then the question is, if it's to do with technology, can you apply the same technology and give customers the same benefit that somebody more nimble coming into the market can do? I remember when I was finance director for 15 years before I was chairman. In the early 2000s, every single investor presentation had to start off with what you were doing on the internet, because banks were going to be destroyed by internet-only banks. 2 or 3 years later, every major bank in the world